Welcome back to Reading Every X-Men Comic Ever, the weekly series where I read, recap, and rank every X-Men comic ever. This week was all X-Men, with Uncanny X-Men 189 through 195, X-Men Annual 8, the X-Men Alpha Flight miniseries, and Here's for Hope starring the X-Men. There is so much to cover in so little time, so I will try my best to cover everything important, but as always, I highly recommend reading these issues for yourselves if you are interested to get the full experience. With that out of the way, we start with Uncanny X-Men. And like I said, I read issues 189 through 195. Now, most of these are one-off stories with only one multi-issue arc, which itself is only 2 issues. Issue 189 starts us off with an unlikely pairing of Amara and Rachel. While out and about, the pair catches wind of Selene and decide to follow her and attempt to kill her for revenge. This unsurprisingly goes pretty poorly, so the X-Men have to save them. Having escaped his containment, the evil wizard Cooling Gath immediately turns Manhattan into a fantasy hellscape that he rules over. Everyone inside the magical border believes this is how reality always has been, and this includes a bunch of heroes, including the Avengers and the X-Men. Although Spider-Man is unaffected for some reason. Chuck gets merged with Caliban, the New Mutants get enslaved and become the Wizards' generals, with the exception of Warlock, who escapes, and Doctor Strange is incapacitated, for lack of a better term. Spider-Man's confused as fuck, unable to communicate, and getting chased by the New Mutants, so he heads into a tavern, which conveniently is where the Avengers are, and also Nightcrawler and Rogue and Magic. As you can imagine, a brawl ensues. Storm and Callisto show up right at the end, and they help everyone escape, and they all join forces. The party then comes up with a new plan that involves half of them walking through the front door to the main palace, and the other half sneaking through the underground. This goes as well as expected, and by that, I mean it doesn't work at all. Vision and Colossus explode, the underground team gets turned to statues, Spider-Man pays for our sins and then fucking dies. It's up to Storm and Warlock, who attempt to take the wizard's necklace while he's distracted, which almost works, but shocking no one, Selene betrays them and steals it herself. In one last-ditch effort, Warlock merges with Storm, who then casts True Polymorph on Selene and steals her life force. With all the evil magic users defeated, their mind control spell and transmutation spells all cease to function. However, the reality warping spell around Manhattan is too powerful to dispel, so Doctor Strange channels his magic through magic to turn back the clock so that this event never happened. However, when you mess with time, it tends to mess back. Kitty and Wolverine finally arrive back in New York after their Japan adventure, and Rogue, Colossus, and the newly minted leader of the X-Men, Nightcrawler, do some training outside when Warlock's dad, Magus, arrives. They do their best to fight him off, and succeed-ish. A few months later, after one of Chuck's classes at Columbia, he gets a brick and a beating as a Christmas present, severely injuring him. The Morlocks find him and heal him up enough to get him back on his feet, but he's not 100%. Callisto takes him back to the mansion just in time for the X-Men to receive a message from James Proudstar, who has kidnapped Banshee and hidden him within the NORAD base, and challenges the X-Men to find him. James's fellow Hellions, Empath Roulette, and newcomer Firestar decide to help him for no other reason than to fuck with him. The X-Men obviously go to the rescue of Banshee, but it goes wrong immediately, thanks to the unwanted Hellions' interference. Kitty and Wolverine do find Sean, but get attacked by James, who ends up having second thoughts about the whole scheme. Firestar attacks Colossus, but Rogue intervenes, allowing access to Firestar's memories, and sees that she's been being manipulated by Empath the entire time. Fucking shocker. James then finds Chuck in the Blackbird and goes to kill him, but Chuck actually uses his words for once and communicates with the boy, making him stand down. In the last 2 issues of this batch, the X-Men, still recovering from their fight with the Hellions, get word of Juggernaut in New York before they're all attacked by Nimrod. And then they help the Power Pack after they are the targets of an attack by the Morlocks that makes everyone they ever knew forget who they were. At the end of that issue, the X-Men are all summoned back to the mansion by Magneto of all people. You can guess what for. That covers all the Uncanny X-Men issues, and honestly, I thought they were all pretty good. 190 and 191 are the standouts for me here. They're just super fun and weird, and I honestly wish we got another issue just to spend more time in that weird reality. I gotta shout out Angelica Jones, aka Firestar. I found her so immediately compelling and enjoyable when she showed up in 193, and I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe it's her innocence compared to the jackassery that is Empath and Roulette. Maybe it's the fact that she's being constantly manipulated. Maybe it's a combination of both. I don't really know. All I do know is that I just wanted her to stay around with Xavier's team at the end of the issue, even though I know she wouldn't. On the topic of interesting characters, Kitty Pryde is another one that really stood out for me here. She seems to have a lot more confidence post Kitty Pryde and Wolverine, and she's felt like a proper part of the X-Men now, instead of just the kid on the team. X-Men Annual 8, written by the ever-constant Chris Claremont, with art by Steve Leloha. This and the X-Men Alpha Flight series take place in the months between Meg's initial retreat and Chuck getting hit with a brick in issue 192. This annual is a sort of spiritual successor to Uncanny X-Men 153, telling a fictional tale starring the X-Men as the main characters. This time it's Illyana who tells the story, and it's a space epic starring a dragon named Lockheed and his motley crew as they fight against their enemy, the White Queen, all the while Illyana is not so subtly weaving her thoughts on her friends' predicaments and relationships into the narrative. This does end up being the best and most fun X-Men annual so far, in my opinion, but it doesn't quite hit the highs that the aforementioned Uncanny X-Men 153 does. I think most of that is because it just doesn't feel that unique of a setting compared to the actual Marvel Universe that's been shown in these books. I mean, we've been to space with the X-Men multiple times at this point. X-Men Alpha Flight is a two-part miniseries by Chris Claremont and Paul Smith. Scott, Madeline, and their passengers go down in a plane crash in the Canadian Arctic, so the X-Men and Alpha Flight team up to figure out what's going on. They find the normal people from the plane have transformed into godlike beings with incredible powers. Oh, and Scott's fine. Actually, he's better than fine, because he's been healed and he can actually control his powers now. Turns out Maddie's new power is healing, and so she just heals a bunch of the team members, so they're normal humans. This X-Fight group are shown the thing that gave these people their powers, and it's a beam of light called the Magic Fountain. Regardless of what it's called, normal human Alpha Flight member Heather Hudson is entranced by the fountain and enters it, coming back out, powered up. And you know what? It's a good look. I'm not going to deny that. It's a very good look. Not everything is hunky-dory, however, as Shaman's bag of holding starts spewing demons that attack him, putting him in critical condition and unable to be healed by Maddie's healing. The mystery of this paradise continues to confuse the X-Men, but it's Wolverine and Talisman who actually figure out what the price of this great power is. Magic. It's been slowly killing all the magic users, but not only that, it also takes away the dreams and imagination of those who wield it. Such revelations put them at odds with one another as they debate if the few magic users are worth the price of world peace, and if they're even really human anymore if they can't dream or have a passion. In a weird twist, it turns out this whole thing was orchestrated by Loki, of all people, who has made a deal with the gods of gods for more power, I think? But he has to adhere to the challenges they gave him, and shocker, he doesn't. Everyone gets ready to leave, and Rachel and Scott have this really heartwarming moment together talking about Jean Grey without either one of them really admitting they're talking about Jean Grey. This was a weird one for me. I really, really liked it when I initially finished it, but the more I sat on it, the more I found I was not reflecting as highly on it. I still think it's great, don't get me wrong, but I think if there were a couple more issues, it would have really helped flesh out some of the plot lines. And I'm not entirely sure the Loki thing was necessary. I think having a magical beam that grants powers at the cost of the user's dreams, imagination, and magic brings enough conflict as is to carry the plot. I also think it's just more interesting of a plot. Not every story needs a bad guy. This brings us to Heroes for Hope, starring the X-Men. This was a one-off comic made by Marvel to help benefit famine relief in Africa at the time, with all of the proceeds of that issue going towards that cause. So many people worked on this book. I am going to go through this as fast as I can, but this is gonna take a bit. For writers, we have Chris Claremont Ann Nocenti, Jim Starlin, Jim Shooter, Stan Lee, Ed Bryant, Louise Simonson, Stephen King, Bill Malto, Alan Moore, Harlan Ellison, Joe Duffy, Mike Barron, Denny O'Neil, George R. R. Martin, Bruce Jones, Steve Englehart, Mike Grell, Archie Goodwin, and Bernie Wrightson. For art, we have John Armita Jr., John Buscema, Brent Anderson, John Byrne, Bernie Wrightson, Charles Vest, Richard Corbin, Mike Kaluta, Frank Miller, Brian Bolland, John Bolton, Steve Rude, Brett Blevins, Herb Triumph, Gary Morrow, Paul Galassi, Alan Weiss, Jackson Geiss, and Howard Chaykin. Jesus Christ, that's a lot of people. And that's not even including the 21 inkers, 11 colorists, and 14 letterers. The premise is pretty simple. The X-Men are attacked one by one by an entity of pure despair, leaving many of them hopeless. They track this entity to Africa, where they find hundreds of starving people. They help however they can, unloading and handing out food from the planes that are arriving, but they barely make a dent in the problem, which only adds to their feeling of hopelessness they already have. After another fight with the entity, where this time it possesses Rogue, and then ends up escaping, they realize that this fight never really ends. And it's not just a fight they fight. Every person in the world fights this fight, and the only way to conquer it is to have hope, even if it's just for the little things, because you never know where the tiniest victories will bring you. Which I think is a message that we need a little more of sometimes. So I'm gonna be honest here. This issue was before my time, so I'm not super knowledgeable on the details surrounding this event. However, I do think it's for a worthy cause, and it's a good gesture. The story itself is good enough, and I really like the message at the end, and beyond that, I don't really have anything else to say. With that, all of the issues have been recapped and reviewed, so all that's left is the rankings. Like last week, there is a fairly even number of 7s and 8s across these issues, but there is actually a 9 this week, courtesy of issue 191. Heroes for Hope starring the X-Men is a one-off, but it still does get added to the completed series list with a 7. X-Men Alpha Flight ends up with a 7.5 overall, which puts it on the same level as Wolverine Volume 1, which feels wrong, but that's just how the cookie crumbles, I guess. That's all for this week. If you've gotten all the way through this video, I really, really appreciate it. And if you liked it, please hit any of the buttons below. If you have any thoughts or questions, leave them in the comments. I will love to hear them and potentially answer them if I can. The entire playlist is in the description below, and subscribe to stay tuned for the next one. Speaking of, it's the final 3-pack of miniseries before this era comes to an end. See you then.